Welcome to NBA Jam Tatman QC on Fire Edition. Boom shakalaka!
Happy little games. When it comes to the epitome of the 16-bit console wars between Sega and Nintendo from the early 1990s, I've got just two words for ya: blast processing. Growing up, you were either in the Sega camp or the Nintendo camp, and brand loyalty played a huge part, at least on my playground. Personally, I didn't care. I just wanted a true arcade experience at home, which is what I wasn't getting with my 8-bit Nintendo. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved my NES, but as I started to get older, my eyes were attracted to the super slick, uber sexy, all-black console, the Sega Genesis. The Genesis, or Mega Drive, featured 16 bits of power, and at the time, some truly stunning arcade home conversions. This system would go on to be the shot in the arm that Sega needed to finally compete with Nintendo in their attempt to take down the house that Mario built. Did Sega beat Nintendo in the console wars? What were the controversies surrounding Electronic Arts and Accolade? What was the primary goal behind designing the Sega Genesis? Let's find out as we take a look at the history and the games of the Sega Genesis. Before getting started, if you would do me a favor and make sure you are subscribed, because it appears only around 40% of my regular viewers are actually subscribed. A lot of you have reached out to tell me that YouTube has unsubscribed them, so do me a solid and double check it. It helps me and the channel, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Sega were quite possibly the king of the arcades in the 80s and into the 90s. Outrun, Afterburner, Power Drift, and Golden Axe are all classics as far as arcade titles go, but these are just the tip of the iceberg. The hardware skills of the company were second to none, even when attempting to claw its way into the home market. Early on, Sega had decided to enter the home market due to a downturn in the arcade industry in the early 1980s, which led the company to selling its North American arcade organization and licensing rights to Bally Manufacturing for a period of 2 years. Over in Japan, though, things were brewing on the home front. Here in the States, we never received their first home system, which was the SG-1000 or the SG-1000 Mark II. However, we did receive the Mark III, which was the Sega Master System. While it was clearly superior to the NES, it just did not have the penetration that Sega needed to compete with the artillery shells that Nintendo were blasting all over North America and Japan. The Master System would go on to have a lot of success in Europe and Brazil, and Sega wanted to build upon this only on a grander scale. Almost as soon as the Master System had launched in Japan, Sega's R&D team, which was headed by Masami Ishikawa and supervised by Hideki Sato, began work on its successor. Sega had received another threat to its home console business in Japan when NEC released the PC Engine, which was widely praised both by critics and the audience alike. Not only did they have one competitor to worry about with Nintendo, now they had NEC. Ishikawa decided to go for broke and at this point decided to incorporate a 16-bit microprocessor into the new system in the hopes of adapting the long string of Sega arcade classics for use at home. The Motorola 68000 was the chip of choice and was initially designed for computers such as the Apple Macintosh, Commodore Amiga, and Atari ST. Sega was very familiar with this chip as the 68000 was used in a number of arcade titles running on the stunning System 16 board. These included Super Hang-On, Thunderblade, and Space Harrier, among many others. One problem with these powerful arcade titles was that they would use dual 68000s, which would not be possible for a home system at the price point Sega wanted to achieve, which would be right about $200. Ishikawa was tasked with creating a home console that was capable of bringing arcade titles that ran on the same hardware to homes all across the world. According to Mr. Ishikawa, I was tasked with developing the Mega Drive. It's made up of 2 CPUs, a main and a sub, and dual VRAM. I was asked to get as close as possible to the System 16 arcade board in terms of graphics, so I had to use these elements as well as possible to create a high-level home console. Figuring out how to do that caused me a lot of anguish. At first they didn't think it would be possible due to the high cost of the 68,000, but due to the number of chips being ordered from Sega, they were able to negotiate a very low price per chip. Rumor has it the initial order was for 300,000 chips. At this time, Sega also noticed an opening on the home console market due to Nintendo hanging on to the 8-bit NES just a little bit too long. You can't really fault Nintendo for this, as the original NES would go on to sell over 60 million units in its lifetime. The company saw no reason to release an upgraded version when the original was still selling by the boatloads. As a matter of fact, the Super NES did not release in the US until 1991. Sega realized they would have a 2-year head start, and it would be the perfect opportunity to create the most powerful home console at the time. Rather than build upon the brand awareness of the Sega Mark series, the name Mega Drive was chosen from a list of over 300 possible candidates. They wanted to introduce a new image for the company and decided to go with Mega Drive as its official moniker. When compared to the stats of the current systems on the market at the time, such as the NES and PC Engine, you can clearly see the Mega Drive is much more powerful. The Motorola 68,000 runs at 7.67 MHz with a dedicated CPU for the sound. The system has a resolution of 320 by 224, which also allows for multi-plane scrolling or parallax scrolling, which is something that is truly a sight to behold. This effect was very prevalent in Sonic the Hedgehog. The system can display 64 colors on screen at once from a palette of 512. The system is also capable of displaying 80 sprites on screen at once, which is over double of what the PC Engine could offer. As far as the audio goes, the system sports the YM2612 synthesis chip from Yamaha, which includes 3 PSG channels, 1 noise channel, and 6 FM channels, one of which could handle sampling. Another innovation with the system is the 3-button control pad, which was modeled after the arcade JAMA standard. Even the newer PC Engine only utilized a 2-button pad, so this was definitely a big step in the right direction. Something else the control pad offered was its ergonomic curved design, which allowed for greater complexity. Mr. Ishikawa has also stated that the shell of the system was created first, from the very beginning, so that upgrades would be possible, leading to the advent of the 32X, Sega CD, and more. And if you were rich enough, you could ultimately have the Tower of Power. The shell of the system was designed by Mitsushige Shiraiwa, who took inspiration from audiophile equipment and automobiles. As you can see from the concept drawings, the designer was certainly going for a futuristic audiophile look. By the way, at this point, at least internally, the system was still known as the Mark V. Also, going with the ergonomic concept of the controller, Sega even apparently went with something that turned out similar to a Nintendo Wiimote and nunchuck. Thankfully, this design didn't get approved. He wanted to target the appearance of the Mega Drive to all ages, unlike the Famicom, which was aimed primarily at children. Since the system was designed to appear as a high-end audio player, the words 16-bit was embossed in giant letters to create an impression of power. Early on, Sega had intended for a number of peripherals to be launched, including a floppy disk drive, graphics tablet, keyboard, printer, and a modem. This modem would be different than what cable companies would later offer as part of the Sega Channel package, which I happened to find one time at a Goodwill years ago. This original modem would allow you to play online games utilizing a standard phone line. The Mega Drive offered a stereo jack, giving you the ability to play some pretty impressive stereo sound. There is also an included volume slider. The console itself offers a reset button, an expansion control port which was to allow printers, RF out, Sega AV out for providing crisp visuals and audio, and of course, one for the power connector. Unlike the Famicom, the system did not feature a built-in lockout chip that prohibited unlicensed games from running on its system. However, there was a mechanism buried inside of the programming code which used a simple check for the word Sega in a specific location within each cartridge. This was known as the Trademark Security System, or TMSS. All of these tantalizing features, all for the low price point of under $200 or 21,000 yen at the time. This is all well and good and looks fantastic on paper, but it's only as good if the software takes advantage of the hardware. According to the founder of the Sega Technical Institute and programmer Mark Cerny, the software sells the hardware. If there are no good games, then of course the console will not be a success. Sega had vowed to provide a wide variety of games and genres for its 16-bit powerhouse, but just looking at the launch titles, around 70% are pure arcade conversions. There were 8 titles launched with the system, including Tommy Lasorda Baseball, Thunder Force 2, Space Harrier 2, Last Battle, Golden Axe, Ghouls and Ghosts, and Altered Beast. Third-party support was slow to arrive, although there was some controversy behind the scenes. Electronic Arts founder Trip Hawkins was never a fan of Nintendo's practices, including controlling manufacturing and a large licensing fee. Since the system was aimed primarily at kids, certain themes were also prohibited. At this point, Electronic Arts had still not entered the home console market and didn't even consider NEC as a possibility. Mr. Hawkins felt that the 16-bit Sega machine would be the perfect platform to introduce a whole line of video games. For over a year, EA had kept their Sega Genesis plans a secret as they had reverse engineered the console and planned to produce their own unlicensed Sega Genesis games. EA debuted their line of games at the summer 1990 Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago. When Sega found out about Electronic Arts reverse engineering their product, they were not too happy. However, Electronic Arts threatened to release the titles without a license, and even considered sharing their reverse engineering methods with other companies if Sega did not agree to much more favorable terms. This high-end pressure led Sega to negotiate a deal that allowed EA to manufacture their own cartridges and pay a reduced licensing fee. Along with this, EA were given the right to make as many cartridges as they wanted. Mr. Hawkins has stated that early on, he would have 3 new Mega Drive titles in development every month. They also added a yellow tab to the cartridges to distinguish itself from other titles. Speaking of the manufacturing process, this was something that was prohibited from licensees. It was a practice that Nintendo had started, which Sega directly copied. While Electronic Arts had illegally reverse engineered the system, another company attempted this with not so great results. The company of Accolade, which had been around producing computer games for a number of years, also didn't like the licensing agreement that Sega offered. According to Accolade co-founder Alan Miller, you have to pay Sega between $10 and $15 per cartridge on top of the real hardware manufacturing costs. So it about doubles the cost of goods to the independent publisher. To reverse engineer the system, Accolade purchased 3 cartridges and disassembled them. Using this information, they programmed the new cartridges in such a way that it would disable the security lockouts that prevented unlicensed games from being run on the Genesis. The problem was, in doing so, it also copied Sega's copyrighted game code, which was a big no-no. A lawsuit was filed with Sega initially winning, with Accolade having to recall 6 cartridges that were already on the market. This was appealed successfully by the company a couple of years later, with Accolade finally becoming an official licensee for Sega. One of the early mandates from the powers that be at Sega was that they wanted the system to be backwards compatible with the Master System. This was strange because they wanted to create a brand new identity for the Mega Drive and shying away from the Mark series. With that being said, the Master System adapter was released and ran the majority of the titles just fine on the 16-bit system. The Genesis managed to carve out a nice slice from Nintendo's pie thanks to its 16-bit capabilities and software that looked fantastic. While we were treated to some excellent titles such as Super Mario 3 and Batman on the NES, which for a number of years, Super Mario 3 was the best-selling video game of all time. However, gamers were looking for the next big thing and found it in Sega's machine. Sega was marketing directly towards teenagers and above with outrageous ads such as Genesis does what Nintendo don't, which was the brainchild of Sega of America CEO Michael Katz.
Genesis does
16-bit arcade graphics.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does
16-bit arcade action.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis
Does.
Genesis does
16-bit arcade hits.
You can't do this on Nintendo. Genesis does
What Nintendo don't. The 16-bit Genesis system by Sega. Genesis does it all.
The familiar cry of Sega was heard in a number of TV commercials as well. Their software library was starting to grow, but Sega could not get a foothold in its native Japanese country. Here in America, though, things were a bit different. The Super Nintendo was released in the fall of 1991, and we had a big knockdown dragout between the two. As previously mentioned, you could have the best hardware in the world, but if you don't have that one killer app, then you don't really have anything at all. Sega had tried to push Alex Kidd as its mascot once upon a time, but he just didn't have the worldwide appeal that the company was looking for. While the pack-in title of Altered Beast was a nice addition, it was bare bones as it was just a straight-up conversion of the arcade game, which, looking at it 34 years later, really doesn't hold up. I really enjoyed this conversion back in the day, but it wasn't a killer app. The killer app and mascot that Sega created would come into play when it was released on June 23rd of 1991, which is the original Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic was the brainchild of Sega of Japan President Hayao Nakayama, who decided to shy away from pure arcade ports and wanted a game that would show off the Mega Drive's capabilities. He also wanted to create a mascot to compete with Nintendo's Mario. Sonic's first worldwide debut was not in his own game, but as a hanging ornament from the rearview mirror in the arcade game Radmobile, which debuted a full 5 months before the release of Sonic the Hedgehog. Although the American staff felt that Sonic would have no appeal, especially to young children, upon release the game received critical acclaim and sold like hotcakes. Mr. Kalinske decided to replace Altered Beast with Sonic the Hedgehog as the pack-in title for the Sega Genesis. This increased the popularity of the Genesis in North America and helped Sega gain 65% of the market share against Nintendo. Speaking of winning the 16-bit console wars, with over 30 million units sold worldwide, have you ever wondered how the Genesis was able to do it? It was all due to blast processing.
The Sega Genesis has blast processing. Super Nintendo doesn't. So what's blast processing do? And what if you don't have blast processing?
People have said this was just a mere marketing ploy, but apparently it was something that could have been potentially used, but it's really hard to find a concrete answer. As previously mentioned, the system offered a number of additional add-ons thanks to the forward thinking of the original Mega Drive design team. The fighting game revolution was upon us thanks to Capcom and Street Fighter II, which prompted Sega to introduce the 6-button pad and also the arcade power stick. For all your rootin' tootin' gun shootin' pleasure, Sega introduced a couple of different light guns, including the Menacer and Konami's Justifier, which allowed you to play Lethal Enforcers and Terminator 2, the arcade game, among others. A multi-tap was introduced that would allow up to 4 players to play simultaneously. And of course, last but not least, there was the absolutely phenomenal Sega Activator, which was a device that lays on the floor that would translate the player's movements into game inputs. This was shown off at the 1993 Winter CES, in which Streets of Rage 2 was not so successfully demonstrated. In addition to the Sega Channel, which allowed people to download games without any multiplayer online functionality, Catapult Entertainment created the X-Band. This would allow Sega Genesis players to play against each other online over a standard phone line. Initially, it was only available in 5 US cities, and it wasn't that big of a success. It was eventually discontinued in April of 1997. The Sega Genesis was the system that just kept on giving, as there were 3 different models released, including the second edition, commonly known as the Mega Drive 2 in Japan, but sold as just the Genesis in America without the Sega prefix. This was a lighter, smaller, and cheaper version of the console, which helped extend its life. We also received a Genesis CDX, which is a combination of the Sega Genesis and Sega CD. A number of other hybrids came along, including the Wonder Mega from JVC, the Pioneer Laseractive, which runs both Sega and PC Engine games, and finally there was also the Genesis Nomad, which was the only successor to Sega's Game Gear. The Sega Nomad was a 16-bit portable Sega Genesis utilizing a 3.25-inch LCD screen, but it sucked batteries like I sucked down vodka. It ran on 6 AA batteries, which provided about 2 hours of gameplay time. Genesis games were also available in arcades starting in 1989. The Megatech system was an arcade cabinet which was similar to Nintendo's PlayChoice 10. The cabinet offered 8 different Genesis games for you to try. By the way, there was also another portable Sega handheld, which was the Japanese exclusive Sega Megajet. This was used on Japanese airlines and could be connected to an armrest monitor. A consumer model was also released in Japan, but you still needed a screen to be able to use it. This fetches big bucks now on the collector's market. If that wasn't enough, in Japan, the Sega TerraDrive was released in 1991. This was developed by Sega themselves but manufactured by IBM, as it was essentially a PC that allowed you to play Mega Drive games. The Genesis was officially discontinued in 1998, so Majestico Entertainment released the Genesis 3. This is even smaller than the previous models and can only play standard cartridges, as it omitted support for the Sega CD and 32X. Brazilian company Tectoy also helped keep the system alive by releasing a number of variants of the Master System and Mega Drive, which would prove to be extremely popular to consumers into the 2000s. Thanks to the huge success of the NES Mini, the Sega Genesis Mini was released in 2019 and it was a big success. It included 2 D-pads and 40 built-in games. It would prove to be successful enough that the company would release the Sega Genesis Mini 2, which provided 60 brand new games, including a ROM version of Sonic CD. Another peripheral that never saw the light of day, to the general public at least, was Sega's attempt at a virtual reality device, but it was for the Sega Genesis. This made its debut at the summer 1993 CES and was slated for a late 1993 release with a price point of $200. However, this was quietly canceled, and there are conflicting reports as to why, with some stating that motion sickness was the primary reason. Other internal sources have suggested that there was no way they could bring a competent 16-bit VR headset to market for only $200. There were 4 launch titles announced and even a port of Virtua Racing as well, but they were all canceled. Apparently, some prototype ROMs are available to download for you to try. The Sega Genesis was a massive success and is by far the company's best-selling home console. Over 900 titles were released, with new ones still being produced by the homebrew community, such as a port of Final Fight CD. The difference being with this one is that it's running strictly from the Genesis hardware with no help from the Sega CD. By the way, the demo is fantastic, so check it out. With so many titles to choose from, it's hard to pick out the best, but these are some of my favorites that just so happen to be really good. The first one obviously would have to be Sonic the Hedgehog. As I mentioned, this game was a game changer for Sega, as it would not only help the Genesis outsell the Super Nintendo, but also selling over 10 million copies worldwide. The evil Dr. Robotnik is kidnapping animals and turning them into robots. It's up to our spiky, blue-haired dude with an attitude who just happens to run really fast to save the day. The gameplay is pretty simple. Basically, you run as if you had just dropped a few hits of PCP or at least a 5-hour energy, running through the levels and collecting rings. The speed of the game is unbelievable, which was something we hadn't seen up until that point. The graphics are fantastic with excellent use of colors and lots of smooth, parallax scrolling. There are massive levels and even boss fights at the end of each one. This title spawned a massive franchise which has transitioned from the video game screen to the TV screen in the form of cartoons, and finally the big screen, in which 3 major motion pictures have also been produced. While certainly in no one else's top 10 list of Sega Genesis titles, for me, Virtua Racing was fantastic. This was one of the first games I ever imported for Sega's 16-bit machine, and if memory serves, it cost close to $120 at the time. The reason it was so expensive was the addition of the SVP chip, which allowed all those wonderful polygons to move at a decent rate on your home television screen. The port is pretty much a straight-up conversion of the arcade title, but just being able to play it at home was unreal to me at the time. The graphics are pretty good and the polygons move around at a decent rate. While not as smooth as the arcade game, it does get the job done and it plays fantastic. Sega was planning on using the SVP chip and porting over Virtua Fighter to the Genesis in pure polygon form, but they canceled the project and decided to release it on the 32X instead. This was the only title to ever use this technology. Since Nintendo had locked down the license for Final Fight on the Super Nintendo, Sega decided to develop its own beat-em-up from scratch, which was Bare Knuckle in Japan or Streets of Rage for the Genesis. To date, this game has had 4 entries, with the last one being released in 2020. This is a fantastic series of games, and right out of the gate, you'll notice you can have 2 players simultaneously, which is what Final Fight was sorely lacking on the Super Nintendo. There are 3 heroes to choose from as they set out across Wood Oak City to take their beloved town back from the criminal syndicate, which is headed up by Mr. X. There are 8 levels of brawling available and 40 different moves for the various characters. In typical beat-em-up style, you have weapons and you can also pick up food, which will increase energy. The series is awesome, so if you haven't already, you should definitely check it out. Another of my favorites for the system is Castlevania Bloodlines, which would be the last game in the series before Symphony of the Night changed the gameplay forever. This isn't just a port of an existing game, but a brand new addition to the Castlevania lore. There are 2 different characters you can play as, including John Morris, who brandishes a whip, and Eric, who uses a spear. Each hero has a typical Castlevania special weapon such as holy water or an axe, and even unique moves for each character. There are 6 levels in total that sport some pretty excellent graphics. There is even a bit of blood and gore, which shouldn't come as a surprise considering the game is titled Bloodlines. The animation is also very cool, and there's some nice details such as the water effects and reflections on the various stages. This is one of the best games on the system in my opinion. You can't show off various Sega Genesis games and not include Gunstar Heroes. This game takes inspiration from Contra, as it too is a run and gun only amped up to 11. This provides 2 players simultaneously with 5 weapons at your disposal, although only 2 can be carried at once. These 2 weapons though can be combined into one huge powerful attack. The graphics and special effects in the game are absolutely unreal, with an equally impressive level design to boot. The effects include scaling, rotation, and a number of other features which have to be seen to be believed. One nice little feature when playing in multiplayer mode is that if the other player dies, you can pick his carcass up and throw them at the enemies, decimating them a few at a time. You do only have 1 life, but thankfully there is a health bar. Power-ups can also be picked up to increase your health. You also have unlimited continues, which definitely helps. Not only do you have huge multi-jointed mid-level bosses, but you have end-of-level bosses as well. It's amazing what the developer Treasure was able to accomplish with this game. While there are quite a few Disney titles that are really good for the system, my personal favorite would have to be Mickey Mania: The Timeless Adventures of Mickey Mouse. The game is a graphical tour de force of the Sega Genesis, and the effects will make your jaw drop. The game takes place across various levels, which revisit 6 specific short films from Mickey's past, including Steamboat Willie, which starts out in black and white. There are around 25 levels in total, with each short film broken into sub-levels. The level structure keeps the cartoon's chronological order intact, so it feels as if you are playing through Mr. Mouse's actual history. There are bosses at the end of each level, typically with scaling and rotating effects and multi-jointed characters. There are even some unique front view perspectives, as well as riding on floating barrels to change up the gameplay. The animation is extremely smooth and controls are easy to get to grips with. You have a button for jumping and one for shooting marbles, which you collect throughout the levels. You can eliminate most enemies by jumping on them. Again, this is another classic game that you should definitely experience because screenshots do not do it justice. If racing titles are your bag, then you should definitely check out the Road Rash series. This was extremely popular upon its release, and it involves blowing down the road on a powerful motorcycle racing against 15 other bikers. The difference this time is that you can punch and kick the other bikers, knocking them off in the process. Later editions would also offer weapons and split-screen 2-player mode. You also have the ability to update the stats of your bike, similar to an RPG. The graphics are good and the scaling effects are fairly smooth, but the gameplay is where it really shines. It's really fast and it's a lot of fun. I may be a bit biased, but I think The Adventures of Batman and Robin is utterly fantastic. This is a two-player simultaneous run and gun, similar to Gunstar Heroes, in which you can choose to play as either Batman or Robin, but it doesn't really matter as they both play the same. As far as the story goes, Mr. Freeze is back and he wants to send Gotham City to the Kula. To aid him in his quest, he has orchestrated the escape of Joker, Mad Hatter, and Two-Face from Arkham Asylum. First and foremost, the graphics are absolutely breathtaking. The levels of parallax scrolling are a sight to behold, with extremely detailed sprites and special effects. The animation is silky smooth and there are huge bosses at the end of each level. The problem with the game though is that it is extremely difficult. As a matter of fact, I never even completed the game until playing it on an emulator years later. This also hurts the game's appeal because the typical gamer misses out on a lot of those fantastic levels. There are power-ups available, but you only have a limited amount of continues. With that being said, the game is still a lot of fun to play, and it also changes up the gameplay just a bit with levels in which you pilot the Batwing, etc. The music is also really good, although it doesn't use any actual themes from the Batman animated cartoon in which it's based on. Similar to Mickey Mania and Gunstar Heroes, this game needs to be seen in action to truly be appreciated. Screenshots do not do it justice. One of the early titles released for the Sega Genesis was Revenge of Shinobi. The gameplay is similar to the arcade game, but it's an all-new adventure. You can jump, throw ninja stars to dispatch your opponents, or use your special ninjutsu magic. There are also power-ups that will increase your jumping ability, long-range attacks, etc. The graphics are very detailed, featuring large sprites and smooth animation. The level design is excellent with little touches such as a Spider-Man boss, and in early copies of the game, a Batman boss which had to be changed after DC Comics ordered a cease and desist. There are even Godzilla and Terminator bosses, all unlicensed of course. After seeing the Spider-Man boss, Marvel Comics worked out a deal with Sega, which resulted in a number of home and arcade Spider-Man games from Sega. The sound in Revenge of Shinobi is amazing, with the music having a front Far East flair, perfectly adding to each level's ambiance. The game is also extremely difficult, but still a lot of fun to play. While not the best by any means in terms of graphics or sounds, honorable mention needs to be given to Mortal Kombat for one simple fact, which is that all the blood and gore are still intact. The presentation isn't horrible, but the dull color palette and lack of voice samples really hurts it in my opinion. It does play better though than the Super Nintendo.
Excellent. Finish him.
There you have it, my friends, the history and some of the best games for the Sega Genesis. I always loved this system and the various games which just couldn't be possible on a Super Nintendo. If you would like me to cover more Sega Genesis games, let me know in the comments down below. If you've never had the chance to own a Sega Genesis or experience the true 16-bit power of blast processing, be sure and give this system a shot. You'll be glad you did. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. If you would like to contribute but not sign up for my Patreon, you can always click the donate button up above. Thanks everyone for watching.